Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adobe Live, where we are every day between 12 and 1 on a weekday. And we're joined again today by Joe Allam. How are you doing, Joe?
Good morning. Pretty great. It's another dreary day outside, but we're feeling good in here.
We're going to brighten it up,
this morning,
right?
Tony?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. There's going to be plenty of noise, though, out today, so I'll be muting myself periodically. You'll be pleased to know, so we don't have to listen to angle grinding. If you're joining us on YouTube, by the way, that is just fine. You can do that, but if you want to get involved in the chat and the community, then you'll need to come across to behance.net/Adobe Live. And today we're looking for your Lightroom questions. Joe's going to be working through some process-based stuff and some organizational tips to make your Lightroom life somewhat easier. And yeah, do come along, behance.net/Adobe Live, and get involved with the community. And also after the show on our very own Discord. So that's about right, isn't it, Joe? Today it's organization, process, all of that stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, I can go through a bit of a recap on. So yesterday we went through, if you were here on the stream, I went through editing an image and showing a breakdown of how I've edited another image and some kind of like tips on there. So if you missed that one, then go and check that out. That will be in the archive. But today I kind of want to run through a little bit on some of my import, I guess, like strategy or workflow, and some of the things that I do that prevent, or rather prepare me for when things might go wrong. So I made a little mention of it yesterday, of times where I've maybe lost files or they've kind of moved and I need to relocate them. So there's a lot of things that I do at the point of import that really help kind of speed that up if ever you get messy in the future. So always make your future self thank your past self. And then I can go through and show some workflows on how I maybe review my images and make my selections to go through the edits. I'm sure there is like a lot of difference between people's approach here. There's no one way of doing it. So I'd be interested to hear in the chat if people have got different ways that they organize their images and like what they choose to review, or yeah, there's multiple ways. So yeah, if you've got suggestions, I'd like to hear them.
Fantastic. Okay, groovy. Right, well, I think we'll just say a quick hello to some of the people in the chat, then you can take it away. So don't forget, as Joe just said, get your questions ready and fire those into the chat so we can enjoy some of that and have a nice dialogue going. Let's say hello to a few people. Hi, Sandrine. Hi, Kirsty. Hi, Robert. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Jackie. Hi, Oliver. A lot of regulars we get here, Joe. Have you noticed? Really good.
Yeah, it's like a little family, isn't it?
It really is. I was thinking the other day, that I didn't know some of these people a few months ago at all. And now I genuinely feel like I do. It's amazing. So Stuart's here. Angus. Let's see. I think I mentioned Kirsty a moment ago, but if not, hi, Kirsty. Stuart here regularly. Perfect. So there we go. Right. Saying hello to everybody. Don't forget, say hello and drop your questions in. Okay, Joe, let's go.
I think there's also quite a few like lurkers in the chat, people who watch and don't necessarily spread anything. Because when you shared the numbers yesterday of how many people watching, and I don't think they're quite as accurate on Behance.
They're not
right there.
They're not. There's a kind of problem between the communication between YouTube and Behance, and actually the numbers that you see on there are way, way, way off. Tim may well whisper in my ear in a minute and tell me how many people are watching concurrently at the moment. All of them. Brilliant. And but no, it's normally around about 11,000. I think we had 14,000 people watching yesterday. So, it's much, much bigger than you see on there. But that's just to do with the way things connect.
Yeah. Right. So if we, so I've just jumped into Lightroom Classic again. So this is where we left off yesterday. So we're kind of going a bit of a backward step. Yesterday we went through some of the editing, and today we're going to take it back to the introduction of how we sort of import images and things. So we went through a variety of images, and I ended up editing this one from the basic into this edit. So if you missed that, you can go and catch up the stream. Went through all the different settings of what it is that I did to create this fairly subtle, but I think kind of punchy edit to this image. So as we're looking at things here, this is just a sample collection. But I guess what's probably most interesting, and I should point out, this is my 2019 library. Someone actually made a comment in the chat yesterday of saying it was interesting that I had a library set to each year rather than just one library for everything. I've tried that in the past, but the sort of mental clarity that it gives me of separating things year by year just kind of feels like the better thing to be doing. In terms of performance, there used to be a time when it would really suffer the more images you add to the library. I don't believe that's quite as much an issue as it is now. But knowing that I have no plans to stop doing photography and I hope to carry on for the next 30, 40 years or so, I'd like to have some sort of organized approach from the very beginning rather than ending up with a library that's got 3 million images in or something ridiculous. You know, when I'm just thinking ahead for when I'm a toothless old man and I've got all my images in front of me. So let's have a look through my collection here. So on the side, I generally organize stuff by locations. So yeah, what was it? Last year we went to, how many is that? 6 different locations. And I, again, split these out by like top level countries and territories. And within those, I would then split them by regions and I guess cities if they're a big enough sort of area. So let's jump into my USA collection. We did a couple of days in Chicago. So I have a collection here for Illinois. And this is where I've imported all of my footage, all of my images. So you can see we've got 1,366 images in here. And I've gone through and I've rated and colored, and I'll go through that step in a moment. But this is kind of like an example of what we're going to achieve. So how we have everything. So let's take it back to importing. So at the very beginning, obviously you've taken images on your camera and you have your memory card. I pretty much always import from a memory card via a card reader. You can plug into a camera directly with USB, but you're always going to get faster speeds with the card reader. So I've got some images here that were taken. These were actually taken on a Hasselblad. So they're pretty big images, nice depth to them, and just a lot of detail, but they are pretty heavy. So I'm not actually going to do the click of the import because it might take a while to copy, but I can show you everything up until that point. So we select our memory card on the side, and we have a few things over on the right hand side that sort of remember your last used settings, but I can kind of run through and go through what we're doing. So from the very start, I should point out that I store my Lightroom library on my Mac directly, but I usually store the photos on an external storage area. So that could either be an external SSD or it could be on my server, and they're housed there, but the library file is, in fact, the library file has to be on the native drive of your OS. So we build our smart previews. Now what this does is it creates like a localized, smaller but editable version of each photo on your native drive. So that way, if your images that you've imported are on an external drive and that drive's not plugged in, having your smart previews means that you can still access your library, you can still make edits, you just don't have access to the full resolution of that image. That's pretty much always, yep, go for it.
I was going to say that's one of the great things about Lightroom, and this is one of the things that people, especially if they come from Photoshop, don't understand, is that all of the edits you make in Lightroom are essentially text.
Yes.
Yeah. So they are, this particular thing equals this value, this thing equals this value. And that's why you can make those things portable. And that's why you can do exactly what you're just saying there, work on an edit, on a proxy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And interesting actually to point with editing by text. That is something that you can essentially code it yourself. So you could, I mean, a preset is just it's an XML or XMP file, which is very similar to an XML document, how it looks. So you can make all these adjustments, and you could probably have a little bit of fun, with a game of sending out, trying to edit an image purely by the code and seeing how that goes. But we're not going to be doing that today.
Have you ever tried?
Yeah.
Have you ever tried editing with an audio desk? So there is actually a community of people who use a Behringer mixer, but they have all of the different channels set to different things in Lightroom. And you can use a thing, I think it's called P6er. There's a small application called P6er that changes the audio interface across to the controls for Lightroom. Have you ever come across that or tried it?
Not. I've never seen it with an audio interface. I've seen the loop deck, which is essentially like a keyboard macro. But I didn't realize you could hack or manipulate an audio interface. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, check it.
Really
Behringer P6er.
Tactile.
Yeah,
things.
Well, you can do that, and also if you've got a sort of a range of presets, you can actually store that as an effect that you can. So you'd store it and punch that in. So you could literally punch across the effects buttons at the top of the mixer and do that. Anyway, have a look at that. Cool. I just wondered if you'd seen it.
No, I've never. I didn't know that. That's cool. I like that. It's a bit like swapping the other way of making music with just a regular keyboard. Yeah. Playing a piano on a tiny thing,
like in GarageBand.
Yeah,
you can do that. Yeah, and other things. But there we are. Fantastic. Anyway, sorry. I'll carry on.
Yeah, that's fine. So the next along is we want to make sure we're not importing suspected duplicates. So it does as it says, pretty much just making sure that if you're using a memory card you haven't formatted but you've previously imported, it's only going to import the new stuff. You can also make a direct backup at the point of import. So say if you had another external drive plugged in, you could make an immediate backup, so from the drive that you're originally importing to, and a second drive or a second location that you're making a backup to. I actually don't like doing this method, and the reason being is that when you do the backup location, it puts it into a folder that is backed up saying imported on and then today's date. For some people that's useful because the backup of the date that you actually imported, and for some productions that can actually be extremely valuable. But for me, it's potentially not that valuable because I'm usually importing like every couple of days or so if I'm on a trip.
Right.
And likewise, if ever I needed to restore a backup from a backup drive, I'd like to see a whole collection of reverse date folders rather than a load of folders that say imported on, and then I need them by the reference of the date they were taken, not when they're imported. So I actually leave this blank and I do my backups separately via my server, which has its own sort of cloning software. Adding to collection, this is where you're going to be referencing your images from within your Lightroom library. So as I showed earlier, I've got collection sets. Think of these as like a box. In fact, the icon itself is like an archive box. And you can have multiple collection sets or multiple boxes within your sets. And then you come down to your collection, and that is like a folder, and that's or like an album of your images. So I have a collection set for my locations, another collection set for the destination itself, and then a more localized or regional import location within there. So this card is actually, or these images were taken in London. So I go into my London location. And then here's where the future self planning comes into effect. So with my file renaming, so I rename every image that comes into my library.
Yeah.
And there's reason for that, because as standard, your camera will just count up with, I think by standard, they're usually five 5 numerical digits. But the trouble is, when you get to say 10,000 images, or rather you don't actually get to 10,000 images, it'll be 9,999. So actually it's a 4-digit. Your counter then just resets. So after you've taken 10,000 images, it doesn't matter how many days or how many months it's been since you've done that, you can very quickly end up back to image 0001.
Wow.
So if you ever lose your images, or if you need to relocate them, without realizing, you might have multiple locations with an image 0001. So I always rename my files so that they have the reverse date plus the camera that they were used. And I can show that if I go into my template in edit. So here's a great way where you can set up like a file naming template editor. So I have my custom preset here, but it's essentially the reverse date with 4 digits for the year, 2 for the month, 2 for the day. Then I have the camera model, some custom text, which I'll show in a moment, appears over here, and then the original file name. So an example would be you get this reverse date of 2020, July 28th, untitled is your custom text, and then the original file number.
Yep.
If you wanted to add extra things in here, you have your controls down here. So this is built up by choosing various elements, such as such as here, we could add the hour, second, and minute. So for example, the hour, you just select it and it appears up into there.
Yep.
From the top, you can create your presets. So you can save those as a new preset. And I've got a few others depending on what I'm importing. But for the most part, this stays the same and it stays consistent and has done for years.
And that's the great thing about the one thing I really don't like is about the British date system is it's not very good for file storage. Because if you search on the 28th, you've got to search, for example, you said, oh, it was the 28th, but you couldn't remember what month. You've got to search through a whole at least 12 28s to get there. Whereas if you're searching on the month, much easier to filter down. So it's great that you're so organized. Great.
Yeah, I think reverse date should be standardized everywhere.
Oh, I do too. It is actually the ISO. I think it is actually the international standard is reverse date. It's just we do it differently here. Why?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have so many gripes when it comes to like spreadsheets, for example, when you're importing data and some of it's American and that would then be month, day, year, and that makes even less sense to me. But anyway, reverse date. Let's get it into motion.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Totally a fan.
So,
just quickly, I noticed, by the way, you've got Glastonbury there. Is that the town or the event? Or both?
that would be the festival. Yeah.
Cool. Anyway,
that's actually very close to where I grew up.
What, near Pilton?
Yeah, I grew up in Somerset.
Whereabouts?
In Weston-super-Mare.
Did you? Weston-super-Mud.
Yeah. Oh god.
I lived in Street.
Oh really?
Yeah. Oh. 11 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
Yeah. You
are. So yeah, we come on to renaming and we add in custom text. So from here, this is where I usually put in the location. And again, I just kind of do a representation of my collection setup. So I have UK and then I'll do London. Likewise, that could be Japan-Tokyo or however I'm doing it. The reason I do this is because it just gives an extra bit of reference when I'm looking at those individual files later down the line. I can just see at a glance a whole batch of images from a certain space. And you never know, I may change my collection ordering at some point, and that doesn't damage the files or it doesn't mess things up as such. But having that initial reference is just some extra permanent organization that's in the file name. Extension I'll leave as is. So for this one, this is a .3fr. That's the raw format on Hasselblad. You can even set up some develop settings to apply at import. So if you have presets, certain edits that you do to every single image, you can do that. So for example, with my Fujifilm, I've created presets that change the film simulation just on its own. So what I quite often do is when I import my images from my Fuji, I'll choose my classic Chrome film simulation, and that just applies it immediately after import. So it's just one less step to do. Then we have our copyright info. And again, you can set these up with presets similar to how we do with the other one. So you can just add a very simple bit of information, such as your email address and did I just mess that up? Yeah, probably. So you can add your email address and your name, just so that it gets baked into the image. And if ever it gets shared around somewhere, you've always got your name attached to it in some way. Then we come to the destination. So this is where you're obviously choosing how you want to import. So I could import directly to my Mac, or I could go to an external drive that I've got plugged in. So I'm going to show you here. I've got my server, I have my photo sort of directory, then I have my library, and this is where I have all of my images organized by their year. And within there, that's where I have a little bit of further organization of location _ location name. And then from within here, this is how I have my reverse date. So you see there's multiple steps involved on how it is that I organize. But when you look at it from the perspective of Finder, it actually makes it very quick. It may seem like a lot of steps, but it makes it very quick to find everything and how it's all sort of organized.
And also, like you said, your future self will be thanking your past self, which, by the way, is a lovely way of expressing that.
Yeah, it's happened so many times. In fact, recently, during the whole lockdown, I've been organizing and cataloging all of my files together. And I lost a whole 2 years worth of content. I just couldn't find it for ages. And eventually I managed to find, I think there was an image that I'd uploaded to my blog and I hadn't renamed it. So I then knew that custom bit of text, and I just searched for it on Spotlight, applied it to all drives connected, and eventually it found the location. I was like, I've done it, bingo. So yeah, it's definitely worthwhile putting in the effort. And I'm going to mention as well that once you've done all of these things, Lightroom can remember it as your last used settings. So that's always pretty great. But you can go one step further. So I'm going to be importing these to location UK, and also I've got my date format. So it's going to put it into a reverse date. But yeah, once you've done this and you've got your location set, at the very bottom down here, you can set yet another preset. And you could save this as your sort of import settings to use at a future date. So I could do save current settings, and I could just call this one UK, and then Hasselblad, if I'd have applied any of those Hasselblad settings that I wanted in my develop. Or you may have seen that I've got one in here for my UK London collection for my Fujifilm. So if I was to do that, it just immediately sets everything that I had previously and just goes straight into where it is that I wanted with those presets. And from there, you just hit import, but I'm not going to do that because that would actually take a little bit of time with these images. So let's go back to our Illinois for Chicago ones. So let's just imagine I've imported all of these images and we just open them up. And you'll see that I've got my reverse date for my file name taken on my XH1. There's that custom bit of text, USA, Illinois, and then the original file number. And going through, so we've got 1,300 images here. I would effectively just be going through and looking for ones that I want to edit. And at this point, this is when I start to rate my images using a star rating. So you can just do this on the keyboard. And you can see that I've already rated this one as a 3-star image. And then I've gone through and I've edited using the virtual copies that I showed yesterday. And we go through, and again, you know, so many different images here, and between different ones, why would I rate this one a 1-star? Why would I not rate these? What type of things am I looking for? Generally, I'm just looking for things that are of some sort of visual interest, but I'm also paying attention around the image to see, you know, why would this one be a 0-star, whereas this one be a 1-star? It's a very slight difference. But the reasoning between that, I think at the time, I must have been looking towards the edge of the screen and thought, you know, this one's perhaps showing a little bit more of a correct angle out of the camera. It's still obviously distorted, and we'd have to do some transform to correct those verticals, which again I showed yesterday. But yeah, you can spot different things that we're looking for. So let's go a little bit further ahead to some more interesting images. Okay, let's say here. So looking through images, you can see this one has missed the focus. This one's got the focus better. Just still adjusting micro adjustments on the composition until eventually I decide between these two, and I'm like, I prefer this one for this little break in the trains happening over there. And again, looking through, and maybe this one I've rated higher, so I've got the 2-star on this one because I like seeing the end of the train. It shows a little bit more movement. And then this was an edit that I created from that. And it's kind of a personal preference when it comes to rating. And I'd be interested to know if other people use star ratings as their methodology, or if they use something else.
Good one to throw out there, I think. So do you use star ratings? Yeah. Can I just drop in a question from Brian here, just a moment, saying, sorry, but a basic question. I've used Photoshop and Bridge for a long time. As a newbie to Lightroom, could I use Lightroom to replace Bridge entirely? Do you ever use Bridge, Joe?
I haven't used Bridge in maybe about 10 years. Yeah. It's been a long time, but I think in principle, Bridge is actually very similar, or Lightroom rather, is built upon the foundation that Bridge set. So I think there's going to be a lot of crossover, and you'll probably feel very familiar within it. The only difference is that in Bridge, which I would always describe as, sorry, there's a pigeon that's landed on my windowsill.
It's watching the stream. There you go. So now we're joined by pigeons, 14,000 people and a pigeon. But I guess if I'd say to that if you're a photographer, if you're working purely with photography, then Lightroom probably is a better solution for you. But if you're working across the whole Adobe design ecosystem, then Bridge is probably best for handling all of those different file types. Do you reckon that's a fair?
Yeah, because in Bridge, so obviously you can put, I kind of think of Bridge as like a glorified Finder or Windows Explorer. But you can do like version history of things like PSDs, I believe, and Illustrator files and all sorts of things. And you can kind of see more of the layers, like actual literal layers into your image, I believe, in Bridge, whereas Lightroom is purely photos. Yeah, I think there's enough crossover that you'll feel comfortable in here, especially when it comes to organizing your things. So one of the reasons that I use the star rating is because when I'm looking at a whole library here, and obviously, you know, there's 1,300 images taken over a couple of days. I'm not going to edit all of them. Not all of them are even worth editing. But if we go into our attributes here, I can view only the images that I have given a rating. So first of all, we make sure that we have our selection method here of greater than or equal to, and then I just select 1 star. And this is now going to show me all images that I've given at least 1 star. So pretty much anything that's been rated. You could do other methods of choosing your thing, like you may select pics, or you might be preferring a color-coded system. For me, I like rating because it just gives a little bit of extra granularity that if I really wanted to dive down and see where are my, you know, my favorite images, the images I've rated highest. And in fact, on this particular day, I didn't get any 5-star images, but I found this one that I've given a 4-star. Whether I agree with that now or not, I'm not sure. But, you know, as you go through and you choose the images that you want, you can really dial down. And if you find yourself, you've rated more images than you'd like to edit, you may want to start looking at your 2-star and above, so that you don't spend your years editing from one particular shoot.
Right.
And then, as I showed yesterday, once I've got my rated images, I then create my virtual copies. But sometimes I actually do a step in between, and that's where I'll pick certain images. So the pick is a little bit like a flag of saying yes or no or nothing. So up here we have our flags, and you have to be careful with the icons. This is something that I find it trips me up a little bit. Making sure you recognize which ones are selected or not. So with the flags, I'm now searching here for everything that I've picked and everything that I've rated. And the way that we pick an image in the first place is just with P on the keyboard, or U to unflag it. So I think previously it was called pick, which is why I keep calling it pick, but the terminology now is flag. So yeah, we look through and we've got our flagged images and we have our starred images. I think also at the time, the system that I was using was a case of rating my images, choosing which ones to edit, going through editing and doing the virtual copies, and then picking from those virtual copies of which ones I believe to be my favorite images. So even though I may have edited 50 to 100 images, in case of the images I actually think have come out well and the edits I'm happy with, I've picked only 32 of those. So that could be images such as these that just kind of show different things. And again, you know, these are three very similar images, but between them are kind of sharing a different story. So it can be difficult. You know, there's a lot that you have to organize. There's a lot of images that you have. So we can get to even further levels of organization. And this is where we have our metadata. So from the outset, when you look at it here, we have 4 columns of information to be looking for. So we can browse by the dates. And if you're looking at your whole location library, let's go to metadata. And we can see we've got all of the months of the year. And I could whittle down and I could browse through all of those things, or I could see images from a specific camera. So for example, I've got some images taken on my GH5, which is very rare. I pretty much only ever use that for video. Or I could go through and I could view all of my images taken with a particular lens. So for example, one of my favorite lenses is the 35mm f2 for Fujifilm. I can see all images taken at that focal range. The metadata is a great way to kind of view and browse your library in a sort of more digital, robotic way than just looking at locations, for example, or your own personal organization.
I think so. Just a quick question, if I might. Sandrine, and I think a couple of other people, and Sandrine says she's banging her head for laziness. Would your system work across, if you've got years of work and you've got them brought in, would your system work to organize those pieces of work? So if you searched, for example, on the years and whatever else.
Ooh, as in like a retrospective.
Yeah. So do you think do you think that would be possible, or is that a?
I think there's some element of possibility. So as an example, I started using Lightroom in 2014. Previous to that, I used to use Aperture.
Yeah.
And I organized in Aperture very similar to how I do in Lightroom, but I never actually edited from Aperture. I used to edit in Photoshop, and I would use Aperture as just my library organization. So I had a different workflow then. But when it came to migrating a lot of images, so from 2006 to 2014, I had all of these library images. I didn't do the file renaming system until I started using Lightroom, and I wish I did. Right. I never actually went through and renamed those previous ones. Yeah. So it's only from 2014 onwards that I do have them renamed. But you could go through, and as long as you were to use the same naming structure. So for example, if you currently just have file name and you go and append some information beforehand. When you do the find and replace in Lightroom, because it will obviously lose connection to all of those images, I would hope, no, don't quote me on this because I've not done it, but I would hope that it would be able to find and reference, once you've referenced one to this new file name format, it would go through and reference all other files next to it and do a whole system. It may take a bit of time, but that's how it works currently if the file name is the same, because it uses some aspect of the file name as a reference point, and that's where keeping that original number works. But it's definitely a headache. You'd have to be the best judge of, is it worth your time going back through, or is it better to just create a new robust system now
from there on? Working
forward. It's, I don't know, it's a tricky one. Depends how much time you've got, really.
I guess
I guess now is probably the best time to be doing it.
We're not going out much. True. Thank you, that's excellent. Good.
And I just saw, actually, I think there was a comment in there about my rating system, like what is it that I go by to judge what's a 1-star, 3-star. For the most part, it is just kind of a feeling. When you're looking through and you just catch something, and if it just catches your eye, I know how I can edit images to a certain direction. I think, yes, this can go somewhere. I can see potential to this. So I may rate it slightly higher than just, oh, that's an interesting image. But there are definitely times where I go through and I rate things as maybe like a 2-star, and then I go and edit and I get really into the edit, and it develops a lot further than I expected it to. And then by the end of it, I think, wow, like this image has gone so much further than I expected it to. And now I would see this and be like, well, that's like a 4-star image, but originally I only gave it 1 or 2 stars. So knowing that happens fairly frequently, where the power of your editing and you're able to sort of add a little bit more of an artistic style to things, that makes me more lenient in the first place with my rating system, because I know that sometimes you may think it's a bad image and not bother to rate it, but you may have also missed out on something great. So I do rate a lot of my images. But yeah, it does come down to personal feeling. I also, when I'm in the zone of editing, I'll go through and I'll spend a solid few hours. I'll put on some good music and I'll just sit there and just edit. Or sometimes I edit on the iPad. This syncs with my Lightroom CC library. And editing on the iPad is rapid. It's really comfortable. It's so engrossed, and the screen looks great.
It's a good experience.
It's just kind of like it's a session, really, isn't it? I guess it's the same with people making music and stuff. You just get into it.
Absolutely.
So carrying on with the metadata, one extra element that I do quite a lot is keywords. Now you'd actually have to change up here, because I believe by default your metadata shows the label, but I changed the column over here to keyword. And when I'm looking at my library, I may go through my edits, and let me turn on attribute again and browse by virtual copies. So I may go through some of my images, and I will add keywords in the right hand side over here, such as Instagram, and these would be the images that I would then export out and share to my Instagram. And that just again makes it easier, so when we go back to our library and we view by keyword, I can see all of the images that I wanted to share on my Instagram. In this case, not all lenses, but there we go. So these were all of the images from Chicago that I wanted to share on my Instagram. So again, it's whittled down further and further and further and further until I get to the ones that I'm happy to publicly share, that end up looking like a collection like this, and everything sort of all fits together. And that generally works well for me, and has done for the last few years. So that's like a good sort of organization structure of how I have everything. But we can take it an extra step further and use color coding. So this is where, if I take off my virtual copies, you can see that some of these I've got green applied to them, some of them I don't. And this is just a visual cue so that I can see which ones I've edited or not. So I apply a green label to all of my virtual copies. So I can just see at a glance, if I was to zoom out fully. Am I fully? I think I'm fully zoomed out.
I think you are. It's just about.
Yeah, my screen resolution is pretty small on here. But if I was to look at a whole library, I can see very clearly blocks of green, and I just know that I'm up to date, that I haven't missed, huge batches of images that I've not even looked through. So if I'm seeing green all over the place, I know in myself, I'm like, yep, I've been through these, I've edited them. It's just a very quick visual reference. Some people may not like that at all. They may prefer to use the color coding for some other method. And that's where it's great that it's just a color code. You're the one who sets your reasoning behind certain things.
Perfect.
So just before I move on, I just wonder if there's any questions on anything related to that, because what I'm about to show next will be some of the export options and availability.
So Angus is asking, does Joe's rating at the workstation impact his photography technique on site? I guess it would, wouldn't it?
Not really.
No.
I guess one thing I have noticed in myself the last 3 years or so is I really am drawn to the vertical format.
Yeah.
I think it's because I'm shooting a lot in cities, and just tall buildings, and just everything has such a vertical nature to what I'm looking at. And then I'm sharing things on Instagram as well, and the larger vertical images just have more impact. So I guess knowing that previously I was rating vertical images potentially higher, I guess in my shooting side, it's made me shoot both horizontally and vertically for the same scene more frequently. So in fact, here we're looking at all of my Instagram ones, and I've only chosen the vertical ones. But if we were to take that keyword off and take off the virtual copy and the star rating, we'll find images from the same area that are in both horizontal and vertical format. So I think that's maybe the only thing that's adjusted my shooting style.
Okay. Let's have a quick look and see. Earlier on, actually, you've just talked about virtual collections and virtual copies. So that was a question from earlier. And Stuart was asking about the backup system on all your files. Are you using a RAID backup on?
Yeah. So I have my my server set up, which again, if you've seen my filmmaking videos, it's organized very similarly. So we have my library images here, and these are all just the raw files from each of the years, organized by their locations, and everything's all neatly there. And then I have a so this is a Synology NAS storage. And I then have software on there that does a auto backup USB copy, which goes to an external USB drive that I can plug in. I don't have to have it plugged in all the time, but when it's plugged in, it then says like, oh, everything new, go over to the drive. And I literally then have a load of hard drives. Again, these are all organized and labeled by their year. And I just keep those as, I think they're 5 terabytes each.
They G drives. I used, because they looked a little similar to, I used G drive 5 terabyte.
These are the Western Digital. They're just like the Elements ones. So they're kind of like the basic cheaper one, but the fact that I'm not accessing them frequently, I don't worry too much, because they are sort of like a second backup to things.
Cool.
But yeah, the G drive ones I do rate really highly. I've got a few of the larger G RAIDs, super reliable.
Oh, I like them too.
So yeah, everything backs up and organizes here. And I try, if I can, to have my backup as a direct copy. So I don't rename anything to backup or anything like that. I will keep it as perfect as possible, because if ever something fails anywhere, I'd like to be able to just drag from the parent folder and just know that it's copied everything as direct as possible. And then I have my Lightroom library itself. So again, this is looking on the server, but this I have set up with my NAS software to synchronize back to my Mac. So the library has to be on the OS, but I just have that whole library copy up so that it's just always backed up. And everything, again, is labeled and organized by the year. If my library starts getting too big, I'll actually create a new one and call it volume 2. But for the most part, I've kept it as 1 volume per year. Okay, so coming back to the library, if we want to now export some of these images, so we can just right click on that, go to export. Again, I've got some presets because there's a lot that I do the same time, and I hate repeating processes twice. Anytime you have to do it a second time, make a preset.
There you are.
But if we look in our export settings, I guess the advanced dialog, so we can see all these different presets. And there's actually an update to Lightroom now, which I'd heard of, but it's just the first time I'm seeing it. You can export multiple or the same image to multiple different presets just with these checkboxes, which is pretty cool. So it means you can sort of batch process your exporting. So for example, I've got in here my JPEG export bin, and this is most commonly how I'll export out a full res version or a non-editable full res version of my image. And it just goes to a specific folder. So I've got my documents, and I have an export bin, and this is a location where every application that I'm exporting things frequently, it goes into here. So I always have this methodology of exporting to the same location, because sometimes if it's changing, it may go to your desktop, or it may go to the last project you ever used, or it may go somewhere else. By having this workflow, I always know, no matter what, my export bin is where things are. And then from there, that's what I'll put them, into archive or something. And then through my export bin, I then have specific locations based on these presets. You can see I've not actually tidied it in a little while, so there's a lot of images here, but at least I know that they're grouped together in their organized structure. So yeah, I export my image into a Lightroom folder in my export bin, again with the file name and title, so that is the same as like the import process. This is going out as a JPEG. I could change the quality if I wanted. All my metadata is included, and that's pretty much it for this particular preset. But I have other ones, such as my 2000 pixel, which resizes your image to the longest edge at 2000 pixels. Or I have ones that I do for my blog posts, which renames things to have the blog post image in the title. For my Instagram, I generally keep this to reverse date and then the location. So creating these creating these presets is just a great way to always have the same process for the same workflow that you're doing frequently. And it just helps keep things consistently. And I know where to look for all of my exported images. They're in the export bin. Everything's nice and tidy. And that, I guess, is like a very quick run through of like a whole workflow as such.
You are the most refreshingly organized person I've come across in a long time. Back when I worked for Adobe in solutions consulting, I'd go out and look at workflows inside of companies and agencies and see how they were, if there were improvements that could be made, if there were things that they could use to make their workflow faster and more efficient and less error prone. So things like this would be the kind of bread and butter that I would give to them, really. But you'd very rarely come across it. And I think, hands down, I think you are the most organized person I've ever come across. which is really good. And at the risk of sounding like a 1970s geometry teacher, if you're not doing this, it's your own time you're wasting. That's
definitely.
That's the thing.
It's
not hard.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The workflow aspect it's all upfront energy. Once you've done it, it's just there. It really is a set it and forget it. And likewise, once you know how to do it, it's very hard to forget or to change. It's a bit like, I don't know, riding a unicycle. You once you can do it, you can just carry on. Like, there's no extra energy involved. Yes, there's a lot of hard work, but once you're actually on there riding it, it'll work.
It's hard. I went to a circus skills school in Glastonbury for one of my former students, her and her husband actually ran it. And I just woke up one morning and thought, I need to learn to ride a unicycle. I went and tried, and that's a way to end up toothless. I'll tell you, if you're not careful, it's a lot harder than you think. I gave up. Definitely. To be honest, my shins took so much of a whacking on that. It was just, no, not for me.
Oh, dear.
But no, good way of putting it. Of course I did, says Robert Brock. I did, Robert, I swear. And I can even tell you where it was. It was at First Glastonbury Scout Hall. Yeah, and it was Dave and Jenna that ran the Circus Skills Club. There you go. I think they've got a shop there somewhere, but check it out. It's because I've had so many careers, Joe. This is the thing that,
Well, a life of 1,000 lives, or whatever the saying is.
Exactly. Yeah, it feels like 1,000.
But no, the organization is something that, I do get stick for being so passionate and like excited about it, but the workflow aspect, it saves you so much, and it just allows you to focus on the creativity. Because if you mess this up and you lose your files, or you lose a load of work, it's just chaos. And I get that in a physical space, some people can, you have organized chaos. For me, I like a very clean setup. It allows me to just focus in on what I'm doing. But when it comes to digital things, the fact that you can't tangibly see it or hold it, I think it just calls for being structured and, in position. And from, again, experience working in agencies and, my background is in design. So working with multiple other designers and having Photoshop files that would come to me, and like, maybe 3 of the 500 layers have been renamed, and you just facepalm. You're like, why? How am I supposed to work out what this document is? So organizing it, and nothing goes unnamed, everything's collected and opened. It just means that all of your colleagues have a much better time working on those files. But when it comes to an independent workflow, some people will be quick to dismiss that and say, well, it's just me working on it. But that's where your future self comes in, because you 4 years down the line can't remember what you were thinking at the time. So do yourself a favor.
Exactly.
It really, really helps.
And never lose. And I've mentioned this before on the stream on several occasions, actually, and I will never stop mentioning it, is that people forget, while we're in the creative industry and people think that we just all go around going, oh, that's nice. We're running a business, right? If we're freelance, we are running a business, and wasting our time is just eroding our profit. I mean, by what you're doing, if a client said to you, can you retrieve me these images? You could go and retrieve those images, without wasting all of that time. And well, the thing I used to add on to mine is my lowest billable segment was a quarter of an hour. So if I was working on a long client project, when they do a men's, lowest billable segment is 15 minutes. If I can do that in 1 minute, that single edit which comes into that, then I move on to the next one, which technically means I could charge 15 times 15 minutes if I was working quickly in the way that you're showing here.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, I don't know or even if there is an official statistic, but for me, it feels like I spend maybe only 20 to 30% of my time actually doing the creative work, and the rest of it is all the admin and just other things. And that's from a position of being organized and having these sort of setups and workflows in place. But I can imagine people who maybe haven't set this up for themselves yet would have even less time on the creative aspect. And that's just a shame, because, you know, we want to be creative. We don't want to do the business side of stuff. That should just, you know, happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that you are buying yourself that extra time. That's on an editing thing, I remember showing a really big international customer who were spending, you know, quite a lot of time, like a ridiculous amount of time. Now, some of it was down to storage lag, right? So the network lag, rather, on retrieving stuff. But some of them were taking like 15 minutes to retrieve an asset. 15 minutes, you know, to get something. Like I said, some of that attributable to network lag, but not too much. But largely, it was just disorganization, and showed that by using a couple of other strategies, which included Creative Cloud libraries and for single assets, and for at the time the MOGATs, motion graphic templates, that they could erode all of that and bring that down to around 2 to 3 minutes, so about a fifth of the time or less, and then work out how much, you know, said, right, you know the numbers of what you're paying people to do internally, so just take a core sample of that and just work it out for yourself. And they was like,
yeah,
and suddenly people listen, you know.
Yeah,
it's crazy. But no, really, it's great that you've shared all of these things with us, organizing. So now, you know, people, just organize your stuff. Use Joe as an example here, and it just doesn't, not just with photography, use it with all of your assets. For any form you've got of organizing is better than just dropping things onto the desktop and sweeping it up later, you know, which is what most people do. Let's never cut to my desktop, just what I'm saying. Saying this bit, but but no, it's the best way to do it. And you are running a business. Yeah, make it profitable, make it count. Anyway, we are not far off time. We've got a couple of minutes, I think, left for questions. And after that, people can come along and join us on our Discord, which Tim is just popping into the chat right now for everybody. So you can join us there and chat on. Do you ever compose square, Joe? Do you ever sort of shoot horizontal or vertical, but think square when you're composing, you know, for Instagram?
I used to. Before Instagram introduced the 4:5 aspect ratio, I definitely used to think a lot of square things. These days, not so much. So since so the Hasselblad that I was using, that's on loan to me at the moment. I'm just kind of testing it out. That is is it a 3:4 aspect ratio? I believe it is. So that's it's a squarer aspect ratio to what my Fuji is, which is 3:2. So that's been really refreshing to just see things in a different aspect ratio and have the opportunity in camera to kind of compose that. Sometimes I recrop my 3:2s into different ones, depending on, you know, the scene. But yeah, I wouldn't say I look at square so much for photography. Yeah.
It's just I tried it a few years ago. Yeah. Back in, I think it was about 2014, 2015. I was with a friend in LA, out doing some shots up at the Disney Philharmonic and at the Bradbury building. And we were talking about composition, and he was saying about square composition really, really making you think, you know, because you've got that really strict boundary that's equal in both directions. And I just tried it for a while and I actually like it. It's kind of like mobiography for that reason, because I can do that in square. I just wondered if you'd ever tried it. It's a good thing to work at.
Yeah, I think it works well in design formats. I love guidelines and restrictions when I'm designing things. So yeah, square's just nice and perfect, isn't it? It
is absolutely. Anyway, we are at about a time. Yes, the Bradbury building, Steve, the one from Blade Runner and so many other films. Fantastic place if you ever get the chance to go. Really, really amazing. Join us on the Discord. Joe, thanks again for coming along and sharing stuff with us. I'm sure it won't be long before you're back with us for yet more stuff. Perhaps another motion thing is due shortly, I would have thought. But no, great to have you along. Really great. You're always a fabulous guest to have on here, and people love you. It's just great.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone who's joined. Yeah, hope to see you all again soon.
Fantastic. There we are. So until tomorrow, everybody, stay well, safe, happy, creative, all of the above. Go and make something. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Olives had a major run. Maraschino cherries, major run. No one had a run like limes. No one.